What if I told you that being born a girl, in a family that desperately wanted a boy, could shatter your entire world, leaving you with nothing but a burning desire for answers and a shocking secret that changes everything? This isn't just a story, it's my life. A raw, emotional journey of resentment, betrayal, and an unyielding quest for justice that began the moment my parents, the Millers, looked at me, Eliza, and saw only disappointment. From the very beginning, I was an inconvenience, an unwelcome presence in a lineage obsessed with male heirs. My father, a stern man named Arthur, who ran a successful but antiquated manufacturing business in upstate New York, made it clear without words that my existence was a deviation from his grand plan. My mother, Eleanor, once a vibrant woman, withered under his constant pressure, her spirit slowly eroding until she became a silent echo of his will. They wanted a son to carry on the family name, to inherit the business, to fulfill a destiny they'd mapped out long before I drew my first breath. Instead, they got me. I remember my 8th birthday, a small, sad affair. My older brother Thomas, 5 years my senior and the golden boy, received a new bicycle, a gleaming red contraption with all the bells and whistles. My gift? A meticulously embroidered sampler, a stark reminder of the proper role for a girl in the Miller household. It wasn't the toy I coveted. It was the warmth, the affection, the sheer joy in my parents' eyes that Thomas effortlessly commanded. That day, a seed of resentment took root in my heart, a bitter sprout in the barren landscape of their love. It grew, watered by countless slights, ignored achievements, and the constant crushing weight of their unspoken disapproval. Every success I achieved in school, every award I won, was met with a dismissive nod or a comment about how that's nice, but Thomas just got into the prestigious engineering program. It wasn't just neglect, it felt like an act of abandonment, a deliberate erasure of my worth. Years later, I was 17, preparing for college applications, dreaming of escaping the suffocating atmosphere of our sprawling, joyless house. I'd secretly applied to Columbia University, aiming for a degree in business, a direct challenge to their assumption that I would simply marry well and manage a household. One evening, I overheard a hushed conversation between my parents in Arthur's study, a room usually off-limits. My mother's voice was trembling. "Arthur, we can't keep this from her forever. It's cruel." My father's reply was sharp, his voice low but laced with fury. "She doesn't need to know. It would only complicate things." My heart pounded. What were they hiding? The air crackled with a tension I couldn't comprehend, yet instinctively knew involved me. The betrayal I felt wasn't just about their lack of love. It was the insidious feeling that my entire life was built on a lie. This single overheard snippet ignited an obsession within me. I started searching, sifting through old documents, photographs, anything that might shed light on their cryptic words. The Miller house, once a prison, transformed into a labyrinth of secrets I was determined to unravel. My college dreams faded into the background, overshadowed by this consuming need to understand why I was so unwanted. The resentment deepened, twisting into a powerful, almost vengeful curiosity. I was no longer seeking their approval. I was hunting for their truth, convinced it held the key to my own identity. One cold winter afternoon, tucked away in a dusty attic trunk, I found it. Not a letter, not a diary, but a worn legal document, tucked beneath a stack of my mother's old embroidery patterns. It was an adoption certificate. My name was on it, but the names of my parents were not Arthur and Eleanor Miller. My birth parents were strangers. My world, already fractured, imploded. The Millers weren't just disappointed in me, they weren't even my real parents. They had taken me in, a girl, when they already had a son. Why? The injustice of it all, the sheer deception, sent a shockwave through my very being. This wasn't abandonment, it was a carefully constructed charade. My quest for answers transformed into an unyielding pursuit of justice, a burning need to uncover the full extent of their lies and reclaim the life they had stolen from me. The true story, the one they fought so desperately to keep hidden, was far more shocking, far more twisted than I could have ever imagined. And what I did next, to unearth the truth and confront the people who had orchestrated my entire existence, would send ripples through the Miller family that no one, especially not Arthur, could ever have predicted. My name is Alara. I remember the day with chilling clarity, a day that carved a permanent scar across my soul. The sun beat down on our small, dusty village nestled in the heart of Arizona, a place where traditions ran deeper than the Grand Canyon itself. I was only 7, a slip of a girl with hopeful eyes and a heart full of dreams, but that day, everything I knew shattered. My father, a man whose laughter once filled our humble home, looked at me with an unfamiliar coldness. His words, delivered in a low, guttural tone, still echo in my nightmares. She is a girl. She brings no honor to this family. She is worthless. My mother, her face a mask of silent despair, could only watch as my father, flanked by my uncles and the village elders, led me to the edge of our ancestral lands. They called it the leaving ceremony, a cruel ritual reserved for those deemed unfit, those who failed to uphold the family name. For girls, it meant being cast out, abandoned to fend for ourselves in a world that held no mercy for the vulnerable. I pleaded, my voice hoarse with terror, clutching at my mother's worn dress. She pulled away, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, but her hands were tied by the unyielding grip of tradition. The men, their faces stern and unyielding, watched as I was forced to cross the invisible boundary. The world beyond our village was a terrifying, desolate expanse. Days blurred into weeks, marked by gnawing hunger and the constant threat of the desert's harsh realities. I learned to hunt small game, to find water in the most unlikely places, and to sleep with one eye open, listening for the predatory sounds of the night. Every sunrise brought a fresh wave of resentment, a burning anger towards the family who had so easily discarded me. How could they, my own blood, abandon a child for something as arbitrary as gender? This question became a relentless companion, fueling a fire within me that refused to be extinguished. My journey eventually led me to a small town, a dusty outpost on the edge of civilization. There, I found refuge with an elderly woman named Martha, a kind soul who saw past my ragged clothes and hardened exterior. She taught me to read, to write, and to understand the world beyond the narrow confines of my village. But even Martha's unwavering kindness couldn't fully mend the gaping wound in my heart. The bitterness festered, growing stronger with each passing year. I devoured books, not just for knowledge, but for a sense of power, a weapon I could wield against the injustice I had suffered. I immersed myself in history, law, and even ancient customs, searching for an answer, a loophole, anything that could explain or justify their actions. One sweltering afternoon, while helping Martha sort through old family heirlooms, I stumbled upon a dusty, leather-bound journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Its pages, brittle with age, were filled with elegant script, detailing generations of our family's history, their customs, their beliefs. As I read, a chilling realization began to dawn on me. The leaving ceremony, the very ritual that had torn my life apart, was mentioned, but with a stark difference. The journal spoke of it as a sacred duty, a protection, not a punishment. It described a secret, a prophecy whispered through generations, a burden carried by the women of our lineage. The journal hinted at a hidden power, a legacy passed down through the female line, a power so immense it could either bring prosperity or utter ruin to our village. It spoke of a chosen daughter, one who would be cast out, not for weakness, but for her strength, to protect her from those who would exploit her gift. My mind reeled. Could it be? Was my abandonment not a rejection, but a twisted form of preservation? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. This wasn't just a family history. It was a cryptic map, a breadcrumb trail leading to a truth far more complex than simple gender discrimination. The resentment I harbored for my family now mingled with a burgeoning curiosity. a desperate need to uncover the full story. The journal's final entry was a chilling warning, a prophecy of a looming threat, an ancient enemy poised to reclaim what they believed was theirs. It stated that only the chosen daughter, once she embraced her true heritage, could stand against this darkness. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. My family had abandoned me, yes, but perhaps it was for a reason I couldn't yet grasp. This revelation shifted the ground beneath my feet, transforming my journey from one of bitter survival to a quest for understanding. The abandonment, the years of hardship, the gnawing hunger, they weren't just random acts of cruelty. They were pieces of a much larger, more intricate puzzle. And I, Alara, was at its very heart. The thought of confronting my family, not with anger but with questions, filled me with a strange sense of purpose. This wasn't just about my past anymore, it was about the future, about a secret that held the fate of my entire lineage. The truth, I knew, lay buried deep within the heart of the very village that had cast me out, and I was determined to unearth it, no matter the cost. The desert wind, once a mournful lament, now whispered a promise of revelation. My journey had led me far from the familiar desolate landscapes, depositing me in a bustling, nameless town at the edge of the reservation. Here, the hum of distant traffic replaced the howl of coyotes, and neon signs flickered against the vast, star-dusted sky. I had spent years honing my survival instincts, but navigating this new world, a labyrinth of concrete and unfamiliar faces, presented a different kind of challenge. My resentment, a constant companion, sharpened into a focused determination. I needed information, and this town, a melting pot of transient souls and forgotten histories, felt like the perfect place to start digging. My first few weeks were a blur of odd jobs and tireless searching. I waited tables in a greasy spoon diner, the clatter of plates and shouted orders a stark contrast to the silence of the desert. I cleaned rooms in a rundown motel, each dusty corner holding untold stories. Every spare moment was dedicated to sifting through local archives, old newspaper clippings, and obscure community forums, searching for any mention of my family, our village, or the archaic leaving ceremony. Most people looked at me with pity, a lost girl in a big city, but beneath their sympathetic glances, I saw the blank wall of ignorance. They knew nothing of the traditions that had shaped, and then shattered, my life. One sweltering afternoon, while poring over microfiche in the town's small, stuffy library, a faded photograph caught my eye. It was an old newspaper clipping, dated years before my birth, detailing a land dispute between several local families and a mining corporation. The names listed were vaguely familiar, some echoing the surnames of my own family. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't about land, not really. This was about power, about secrets buried beneath layers of tradition and deceit. The article mentioned a particularly fierce advocate for the families, a woman known only as the Weaver of Truths. Her name wasn't Alara, but a flicker of recognition, a primal instinct, told me I was close. I tracked down the newspaper's former editor, a wizened old man named Arthur, whose memory was as sharp as his wit. He sat across from me in a dimly lit cafe, stirring his coffee, his eyes twinkling with a knowing sadness. He remembered the land dispute vividly, describing the desperation of the families, their homes threatened by corporate greed. He spoke of the woman, the Weaver of Truths, with a reverence that hinted at something more profound than mere admiration. She fought like a lioness, Alara, he rasped, his voice a gravelly whisper. She spoke of ancient agreements, of sacred lands, of a secret buried deep within the earth that the corporation desperately wanted to unearth. He then dropped a bombshell that sent a jolt through my entire being. They called her Alara too, you know. Your grandmother, a powerful woman, ahead of her time. My grandmother, the woman I had only ever known through hushed whispers and vague, disapproving glances from my mother. The woman my father refused to speak of. A cold dread settled in my stomach, quickly replaced by a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the first tangible thread in the tapestry of lies. Arthur explained that the corporation, thwarted by my grandmother's relentless efforts, had resorted to more insidious tactics. They had bribed key figures, manipulated local leaders, and most chillingly, exploited the very traditions that bound our people. He spoke of a curse, a fabricated prophecy designed to isolate and discredit anyone who stood in their way. Girls, particularly those born with a certain birthmark, were deemed unworthy, a blight on the family name, and banished. My birthmark, a small crescent-shaped mole behind my ear, suddenly took on a terrifying new meaning. It wasn't a flaw, it was a target. My mind raced, connecting the dots. The leaving ceremony wasn't an ancient tradition. It was a carefully constructed lie, a tool of manipulation. My father's coldness, my mother's despair, they weren't just upholding tradition, they were caught in a web of fear and deception. The betrayal stung deeper than any physical pain. My own family, unwitting pawns in a corporate scheme, had sacrificed their daughters, including me, to protect a secret they didn't even fully understand. I thanked Arthur, my voice tight with emotion, and left the cafe, the bustling street now a blur around me. The resentment that had simmered for so long ignited into a raging inferno. This wasn't just about my abandonment anymore. This was about a legacy stolen, a truth suppressed, and a generation of girls unjustly cast aside. My grandmother, the weaver of truths, had fought against this very injustice, and now I, Alara, would finish what she started. The truth, once a vague concept, now had a name, a face, and a devastating history. I would unearth it all, not just for myself, but for every girl who had been silenced, every family torn apart by this monstrous lie. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but the fire of revelation burned bright within me, guiding my way back to the heart of the village that had once abandoned me. This time, I wouldn't be leaving. The dusty road stretched endlessly before me, each grain of sand a silent testament to the years I had spent away, forging myself into something unbreakable. I thought I knew the contours of my rage, the precise shape of the injustice that had been inflicted upon me. Yet, as I neared the familiar, yet now alien, outskirts of what I still begrudgingly called my home, a new, more venomous strain of betrayal began to curdle in my gut. My earlier resentment, a smoldering fire, now threatened to become an inferno. The village, shrouded in the twilight, seemed to hold its breath, a stark contrast to the cacophony of memories that assaulted my mind. I moved like a ghost through the moonlit streets, the familiar scent of wood smoke and dry earth filling my nostrils, stirring a potent cocktail of longing and loathing. The houses, once filled with faces I knew, now felt like silent sentinels guarding a terrible secret. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet night. I found myself drawn to the edge of the village, to the ancient well where the women gathered each morning. It was there, hidden beneath a loose stone, that I had stashed a small tarnished silver locket years ago, a foolish memento of a life I no longer possessed. My fingers, trembling slightly, unearthed it. The locket was empty, but the faint etching on its surface, a crude drawing of a girl with long braids, brought a fresh wave of agony. It was me, a child who believed in family, in love, in belonging. That girl was long dead, replaced by a woman honed by the desert, fueled by a singular, burning purpose. My first objective was simple: gather information. I knew the rhythm of the village, the whispers that traveled faster than the wind. The old market, still bustling even in the late hours, was my chosen hunting ground. I blended into the shadows, a silent observer, my eyes scanning, my ears straining to catch fragments of conversation. It wasn't long before I heard it, a name spoken in hushed tones, a name that struck me like a physical blow. Anya, my younger sister, the one I had believed was safe, sheltered from the cruel fate that had befallen me. The casual way her name was mentioned, linked to an upcoming celebration, sent a chill down my spine. Celebration? For what? The snippets of gossip coalesced into a horrifying picture. Anya, my sweet, innocent sister, was to be married. Not just married but given to one of the elder councilmen, a man whose reputation for cruelty preceded him even in my childhood memories. It was a trade, a political maneuver, a sacrifice. They were doing to her what they had done to me. Only this time, they weren't casting her out. They were selling her, packaging her innocence for the sake of the family's standing. The resentment I felt earlier was a mere flicker compared to the raging inferno that now consumed me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every girl in this cursed village, trapped by the same archaic traditions. My blood ran cold, then boiled with a fury so intense it threatened to consume me. I needed to know more, to understand the depths of this new betrayal. The next few days were a blur of clandestine movements and calculated risks. I shadowed my mother, a ghost of her former self, her eyes perpetually downcast. I watched as she moved through her daily rituals, her silence a heavy shroud. One evening, under the cloak of darkness, I slipped into our old home, the one I had been banished from. The air was thick with the scent of dried herbs and unspoken grief. I found my mother in the small, cramped kitchen, meticulously kneading dough for the evening meal. Her hands, once soft and comforting, were now gnarled and rough, mirroring the harshness of her life. I confronted her, my voice a low hiss, barely audible above the rustling of the desert wind outside. "Anya," I whispered, the name a raw wound on my tongue. "What have they done to her?" My mother flinched, her eyes widening in terror, her hands freezing in their motion. She tried to deny it, to dismiss my words as the ramblings of a long-lost memory. But her trembling hands and averted gaze betrayed her. The truth, when it finally spilled from her lips, was a torrent of shame and despair. She confessed, her voice barely a whisper, that Anya's arranged marriage was a desperate attempt to secure the family's future, a future that had been jeopardized by a series of failed harvests and mounting debts. My father, in his desperation, had struck a deal, trading Anya's freedom for the family's survival. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My mother, with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, confessed to her own helplessness, her own complicity in the face of my father's unyielding authority. She spoke of the ancestral scroll, a sacred document that supposedly outlined the family's lineage and traditions, a scroll that my father guarded with his life. It was within this scroll, she believed, that the true justification for their brutal customs lay. She begged me to understand, to forgive her, to see the impossible choices she had faced, but understanding was a luxury I could not afford. Forgiveness felt like a betrayal to the little girl I once was, and to the sister whose fate now hung in the balance. The revelation of Anya's impending fate, coupled with the existence of this mysterious ancestral scroll, solidified my obsession. My personal quest for justice had now intertwined with a desperate mission to save my sister. The resentment I harbored for my abandonment now burned with a fiercer, more focused intensity. The betrayal I felt extended beyond my own casting out. It encompassed the systemic oppression of every woman in this village, perpetuated by a lie, a tradition twisted to serve the powerful. I knew then, with an unwavering certainty, that the ancestral scroll held the key, not just to their traditions, but to their downfall. I would find it, I would expose their hypocrisy, and I would tear down the very foundations of the family that had so callously discarded me and was now about to sacrifice my sister. The clock was ticking, and I knew I had to move fast. The ancestral scroll. The very name whispered through the hushed halls of the compound. A relic so ancient, so sacred, its existence was almost mythical. I had heard tales of it as a child, whispered warnings about its power, stories of its prophecies. Now, it was my target, the fulcrum upon which my entire plan balanced. My sister's life, my revenge, everything hinged on that scroll. I understood the The impossibility of breaching a stronghold guarded by men whose loyalty was absolute, whose lives were intertwined with the very traditions I sought to dismantle. Yet fear was a luxury I could not afford. My heart pounded with a rhythm that was equal parts terror and exhilaration. My initial reconnaissance of the compound had been a dance with shadows, a careful probing of their defenses. I observed the changing of the guards, the patrol routes, the blind spots in their surveillance. Their security, while formidable, was predictable, a testament to their unwavering belief in their own invincibility. They had grown complacent, lulled into a false sense of security by generations of unquestioned authority. That complacency would be their undoing. I moved under the cloak of darkness, a phantom in the desert night, my movements as silent as the shifting sands. Each night brought a new piece of the puzzle, a new vulnerability to exploit. I discovered a rarely used service tunnel, almost forgotten, leading directly beneath the main administrative building, the very building where the scroll was rumored to be kept. The tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare, damp and reeking of earth and decay. It was barely wide enough for me to crawl through, but it was my only way in. I spent days meticulously clearing the debris, reinforcing weakened sections, and mapping its serpentine path. My hands bled, my muscles ached, but the image of my sister's face, pale and resigned, spurred me onward. She deserved a life free from their archaic rules, a life I had been denied. This wasn't just about my past, it was about her future. The night of the sacrifice of purity approached with terrifying speed. I felt its shadow looming, a cold dread tightening its grip around my chest. My informants within the compound, brave souls who risked everything for a glimmer of hope, relayed unsettling news. The elders were growing impatient, the preparations accelerating. They spoke of an expedited ceremony, a swifter resolution. My time was running out. I had to make my move, and it had to be perfect. I chose a night when the desert winds howled, a symphony of chaos that would mask any sound. The moon was a sliver, barely illuminating the vast expanse, perfect for my clandestine operation. Dressed in dark, unassuming clothing, my face obscured by a hood, I slipped into the tunnel. The air was thick with anticipation, heavy with the weight of generations of injustice. I carried only what was essential, a small, powerful flashlight, a few lock-picking tools, and a worn photograph of my sister, a constant reminder of my purpose. As I navigated the winding tunnel, the sounds of the compound above became clearer. I could hear the distant murmurs of voices, the clang of metal, the occasional bark of a guard dog. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive darkness. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every creak of the earth a warning. But I pushed through, my resolve hardened by years of bitterness and fueled by the image of my sister. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the end of the tunnel. A thick wooden hatch, cleverly concealed beneath a loose floorboard, separated me from the administrative building. I worked quickly, silently, my fingers deft and practiced. The lock clicked open with a soft, satisfying sound, a whisper of triumph in the suffocating silence. I pushed the hatch open, a sliver of light piercing the darkness, and cautiously peered into the room above. It was a storage room, filled with dusty ledgers and forgotten artifacts. Perfect. I emerged from the tunnel, my senses on high alert, my eyes scanning every corner. The building was quiet, most of the compound asleep, or so I hoped. I moved through the labyrinthine corridors, guided by the rough map I had painstakingly pieced together. Each step was deliberate, each breath controlled. I was a ghost in their hallowed halls, an unwelcome specter of their past sins. I found the vault, a massive, ornate door, its surface etched with ancient symbols. This was it, the heart of their deception, the repository of their power. The air around it felt charged, heavy with the weight of centuries of tradition. I ran my fingers over the cold metal, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me. Breaking into this vault was not just about stealing a scroll, it was about shattering their legacy, exposing the rot at their core. This was the moment I had been preparing for my entire life. My journey had led me here, to this very door, to reclaim what was taken, to avenge what was lost. She would finally have her justice. My fingers, slick with nervous sweat, finally found purchase on the ancient latch. A soft click echoed in the oppressive silence, a sound that felt deafening in the cavernous vault. The heavy door groaned open, revealing not a dusty archive, but a small, meticulously kept room. A single, ornate wooden chest sat in the center, bathed in the faint glow filtering from a hidden vent. This wasn't some forgotten relic. This was a shrine, a place of reverence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. I was so close, closer than I had ever dared to dream. As I approached the chest, a faint, sweet scent of dried desert herbs filled the air. My hand trembled as I lifted the lid, revealing not gold or jewels, but a collection of aged scrolls, each bound with a thin leather thong. The topmost scroll, thicker and more worn than the others, bore a familiar symbol, the intertwined serpent and hawk, the crest of my family. This was it, the very scroll I had risked everything for, the weight of generations, of injustice, of my entire solitary life pressed down on me. She was finally here. Unrolling the scroll with painstaking care, my eyes scanned the faded script. It wasn't a family tree or a land deed, as I had once theorized. Instead, it was a chronicle, a detailed account of every leaving ceremony ever performed by my family, stretching back centuries. Each entry listed the name of the abandoned girl, the date, and a chillingly brief reason: failure to uphold honor, unsuitable, a burden. Then, a column that made my blood run cold: fate. Most entries simply stated unknown, or perished in the desert. But some, a select few, read reclaimed by the matriarch. The matriarch. A name whispered in hushed tones, a figure of legend even within the village. She was said to be the true power behind the elders, a woman of immense influence, but one who never appeared publicly. My father and uncles always dismissed her as an old wives' tale, a myth used to scare disobedient children. Yet, here she was, woven into the very fabric of my family's most cruel tradition. A woman, orchestrating the banishment of other women. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. Further down the scroll, a new entry caught my eye, dated exactly 7 years after my own abandonment. It detailed the leaving ceremony of a young girl named Anya, a distant cousin I vaguely remembered. Her fate column read, reclaimed by the matriarch, trained in the ways of the desert, to return when the time is right, to challenge the patriarchal rule. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a record of cruelty, it was a blueprint for a quiet rebellion, a secret society of abandoned daughters, cultivated and trained by this enigmatic matriarch. A new realization, sharper and more painful than any thorn, pierced through me. My own abandonment, my father's cold words, the elders' stern faces. It had all been a carefully orchestrated charade. They hadn't simply cast me out. They had sent me to the matriarch, knowing full well what would happen. They had wanted me to survive, to grow strong, to become a weapon. She was a pawn in a much larger game, a game played by a woman I had never even met. My rage, once a searing inferno, now transformed into a cold, calculated fury. The scroll then detailed the matriarch's grand design, to dismantle the patriarchal traditions from within, using the very girls they had deemed worthless. Each abandoned daughter was a seed, planted in the harsh desert, meant to grow into a formidable force. The leaving ceremony was not just an act of cruelty, but a twisted rite of passage, a test of survival designed to forge resilience and independence. I was not just a victim. I was a soldier, unknowingly enlisted in a war I hadn't known existed. My entire life, every struggle, every tear, every moment of triumph, had been a part of someone else's plan. The final entry on the scroll, written in a different, more elegant hand, sent a shiver down my spine. It was a prophecy, a declaration: when the 7th daughter returns, bearing the mark of the desert's resilience and the fire of its vengeance, the old ways shall crumble, and the true matriarch will rise. 7 daughters. I was the 7th. The mark of the desert's resilience. My scars, my strength, my survival, the fire of its vengeance, the burning anger that had fueled me for so long. She was the one. A soft rustle from behind me shattered the silence. I whirled around, the scroll clutched tightly in my hand, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint light, was an old woman. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and knowing, reflecting a wisdom that spanned generations. She wore simple, unadorned clothing, yet exuded an undeniable aura of power. This was not a guard, not an elder, but someone far more significant. You found it. Her voice, surprisingly strong for her age, cut through the tension. I knew you would. You have your mother's eyes, Alara, and your grandmother's spirit. My mother's eyes? My grandmother's spirit? The woman stepped forward, and as she moved into the faint light, I saw it. A small, almost imperceptible scar above her left eyebrow, a mirror image of the one I carried. A reminder of a childhood accident I barely remembered. The scar I had always attributed to a fall, but now understood was a shared mark. Who are you? I stammered, the pieces of this elaborate puzzle finally clicking into place, forming a picture far more complex and shocking than I could have ever imagined. The matriarch. She was the matriarch, my own grandmother, the woman who had orchestrated my abandonment, not out of malice, but out of a desperate, long-term plan to save our people from themselves. The woman who had been watching me, guiding me, for my entire life. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. I am the one who sent you away, Alara. And I am the one who has been waiting for you to return. The time for justice, for our true justice, has finally come. You are the key, my granddaughter. You always have been. The weight of her words settled upon me, heavy and undeniable. My entire life, a carefully crafted journey towards this single, pivotal moment. She was not just seeking justice, she was delivering it, fulfilling a destiny laid out for her before she even knew it existed. The moment felt suspended, heavy with the weight of generations. My grandmother's words, a prophecy whispered into existence, had finally found their vessel in me. I stood on the precipice of a destiny I had unknowingly chased my entire life, the culmination of every hardship, every tear, every burning ember of resentment. The path ahead was clear, etched not just by my grandmother's vision, but by the very blood that flowed through my veins. The leaving ceremony that had once shattered my world would now be redefined, its cruel purpose twisted into an instrument of my own design. We arrived at the village under the cloak of twilight, the same time I had been cast out all those years ago. The air was still, thick with the scent of mesquite and the ghosts of my past. My grandmother, her eyes sharp and unwavering, led the way. A silent warrior returning to a battlefield. The village square was empty, the familiar sounds of life muted, as if holding its breath. Then, a single drumbeat resonated, deep and resonant, a call that echoed through the canyons and into the very core of my being. It was the same drumbeat that had accompanied my banishment, now a prelude to my return. Figures emerged from the shadows, faces etched with age and suspicion. My father stood among them, his once imposing figure now stooped, his eyes clouded with a fear I had never seen there before. The elders, their faces a roadmap of traditions, watched us with a mixture of apprehension and defiance. This was not just a confrontation, it was a reckoning, a reversal of fate that defied every custom they held sacred. My grandmother stepped forward. Her voice, though aged, carried the authority of the desert wind. She spoke of the ancient ways, of the balance disrupted, of the truth hidden beneath layers of patriarchal deceit. Then, she turned to me. She declared, her voice ringing through the quiet square, returns not as a banished daughter, but as a harbinger of change, a vessel of forgotten wisdom. My father flinched at the sound of my name, a name he had forbidden for decades. The elders murmured, their eyes darting between my grandmother and me. I met their gaze, not with the terror of a 7-year-old, but with the unwavering resolve of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged unbroken. The resentment that had simmered for so long now transformed into a cold, precise weapon. I stepped forward, my voice clear and steady, each word a stone laid upon their carefully constructed foundation of lies. "You cast me out for being a girl," I began, my gaze sweeping across their faces, claiming I brought no honor. "Yet, in your blindness, you overlooked the very strength that would have protected this village." My words were not an accusation, they were a statement of undeniable fact, a truth that had festered in the desert for decades. I spoke of the encroaching drought, the dwindling resources, the very real threats that now plagued their land, threats that my grandmother and I had faced and overcome in the wilderness they had deemed uninhabitable. A hush fell over the square, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. The elders exchanged uneasy glances, their defiance wavering. My father's face, once a mask of stern authority, now crumpled, the weight of his past decisions pressing down on him. This was the betrayal, not just of me, but of their own future, a betrayal born of their rigid adherence to outdated customs. The obsession that had driven me for so long, the relentless pursuit of understanding why, now found its release in this moment of undeniable clarity. I unveiled the ancient texts, scrolls my grandmother had meticulously preserved, detailing a prophecy long suppressed, a time when the daughters, not the sons, would hold the key to the village's survival. It spoke of a woman, banished and returned, whose wisdom forged in hardship would guide them through the darkest times. The words, once dismissed as folklore, now resonated with an undeniable power, echoing the very struggles they now faced. The truth, stark and irrefutable, hung in the air, dismantling their carefully constructed worldview. My father, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, fell to his knees. "She," he choked out, his voice thick with regret, "my daughter." I was wrong. His confession, raw and unfiltered, was not just an apology. It was an admission of a lifetime of misguided tradition. The elders, their faces a mixture of shame and dawning comprehension, lowered their heads. This was justice, not the violent retribution I had once fantasized about, but a profound, undeniable shift in power, a recognition of my inherent worth. The resolution was bittersweet. The village, battered by their own ignorance, welcomed me back, not as a prodigal daughter, but as a leader, a guide. The ceremony of my return was not one of celebration, but of quiet acknowledgement, a solemn promise to embrace a future where strength was not defined by gender, but by wisdom and resilience. I had not sought to destroy them, but to heal, to mend the broken fabric of our heritage. The lessons learned in the desolate wilderness, the skills honed in solitude, would now serve my people. The fire within me, once fueled by resentment, now burned with the steady glow of purpose, a beacon for a new dawn. The silence that followed my pronouncement was deafening, a vacuum where their carefully constructed world had once stood. My father, the man who had abandoned me without a second thought, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face, usually so composed, was a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. My stepmother, the architect of so much of my pain, simply stared, her jaw slack. The truth, raw and undeniable, hung heavy in the air between us. You found out," my father finally stammered, his voice barely a whisper. There was no anger, no denial, just a profound gut-wrenching realization. The years of lies, the carefully maintained facade, all crumbled in that single moment. I watched him, truly watched him, and for the first time, I saw not the callous man who discarded his daughter, but a broken figure, trapped by his own cowardice. "I found out everything," I confirmed, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor I'd expected. The resentment that had fueled me for so long, the burning obsession to expose their betrayal, was finally giving way to something else, a cold, clear sense of justice. The legal documents I'd painstakingly gathered, the DNA evidence, the testimonies from those few brave souls who dared to speak the truth, it all sat in a neat file on the table, a testament to their deceit. My stepmother, regaining some semblance of her composure, tried to rally. "This is ridiculous. You have no proof. You're just a bitter, jealous girl trying to stir up trouble." Her voice, though laced with venom, lacked its usual conviction. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable. She knew. They both knew. I simply smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that held no warmth. "Oh, I have proof. More than enough. And it's not just for me. It's for my mother, for all the years she suffered in silence, for the life she could have had if you hadn't stolen it from her." The memory of my mother, frail but fiercely loving, flashed in my mind. This wasn't just about my pain anymore. It was about honoring her legacy, about righting a profound wrong. The legal proceedings that followed were brutal, a public airing of their dirty laundry that played out on the local news. Their carefully cultivated image, built on a foundation of lies and manipulation, shattered into a million pieces. Friends, business partners, even distant relatives, all turned away. The shame was palpable, a suffocating blanket that wrapped around them. I watched it all, not with glee but with a quiet, almost detached satisfaction. The obsession that had consumed me had finally run its course. My father, stripped of his wealth and reputation, became a shadow of his former self. He reached out to me once, a hesitant, apologetic email. He spoke of regret, of being pressured, of making terrible mistakes. I read it, but I didn't respond. The wounds were too deep, the betrayal too profound. Forgiveness wasn't something I could offer, at least not yet. Perhaps one day for my own peace. My stepmother, unable to cope with the public humiliation, disappeared from the social scene entirely. The grand house, the expensive cars, the lavish lifestyle, all gone. They faced the consequences of their actions, not just legally, but emotionally and socially. As for me, the path to justice had been a long, arduous one, filled with moments of doubt and despair. But standing on the other side, I felt a profound sense of release. The heavy burden I'd carried for so long had finally lifted. I had reclaimed my story, my identity, and in doing so, I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. The revenge wasn't in their downfall, not truly. It was in my own rise. It was in finding my voice, in standing up for myself and for my mother, in refusing to be a victim any longer. The closure wasn't a triumphant celebration, but a quiet, bittersweet peace. The pain of the past would always be a part of me, a scar that reminded me of what I had overcome. But now, it no longer defined me. I was free, finally free to build a life on my own terms, a life filled with honesty, integrity, and genuine love. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all.